ॐ भूर्भुवः स्वः तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो नः प्रचोदयात्। ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः. Namaste my dear friends, this is video number 23 on Viveka Chudamani of Adi Sankaracharya. This video starts with the topic spiritual growth, the secret. Stanza number 339 to 348. This video starts with stanza number 339. Antarbahi swam sithirjangamesu ज्ञात्वा आत्मना धारतया विलोक्य त्यक्ता अखिलोपाधिखंडरूपः पूर्ण आत्मना यह स्थित ऐसे मुक्त है. That man is free who, knowing the self through his mind in all moving and unmoving objects and observing it as their substratum, renounces all superimpositions and remains as the absolute and the infinite self. This verse gives us a very comprehensive narration of the experience of the liberated man, looking at things from the standpoint of the self and recognizing the entire world of plurality within, without, and everywhere, both the sentient and insentient, as one's own self is the state of total liberation. Through the physical body, we can see only the physical bodies and recognize their individual sizes, shapes, and colors. When my mind contacts another's mind, I understand the emotional contents of kindness, mercy, and goodness in his heart. When I come in contact with another person's ideas, I understand his intellectual qualities. When I shake hands with another, I will not thereby understand his intellectual capabilities. By a handshake, all that I understand is perhaps the strength of his physical grip. Similarly, in order to recognize the Atma in me as the self present everywhere, I must look at it from my spiritual standpoint. Only when I withdraw myself into my spiritual personality and then look out shall I recognize the entire world as the spiritual reality, the self. Therefore, one who has transcended the body, mind, and intellect, meaning all the conditionings, alone can come to experience the nature of the self as the unbroken, immutable, one homogeneous reality. He who thus comes to experience this infinite consciousness where there is no longer any separateness within and without, when there is no longer a perceived world of plurality, as all of them have now dissolved into this one experience of infinitude, is said to be liberated from all the natural limitations of his body, mind, and intellect. Sav atamta bandh vimukti hetuhu सर्व आत्म भावान प्रोस्ति कश्चित् दृश्य आग्रहे सत्य पद्यतेषु सर्व आत्म भावोवश्य सदा आत्म निष्ठाया. To recognize the entire universe as the self is the means of release from all sense of bondage. There is nothing higher than realizing the universe as the self. One realizes this state by excluding the objective world through steadfastness in the eternal Atma, to expand oneself in spiritual vision and experience the totality as one's own self is Sarvatma Bhava, the recognition of the universe as the self. At present, our personality is extremely egocentric. We fail to recognize or to identify with our country or state or community or even beyond our own terrible attachments to our body and possessions. In fact, beyond these attachments, we have no other personality. From this self centered, extremely limited, supremely circumscribed frog in the well experience, we have to grow, expand, and gain the vision of the entire universe as the self in us. Expand to realize that all is the self. Try to find accommodation for everyone in your compassion and in your love for the world around you. Recognize that all things are creation of Narayana. Then recognize that things are only Narayana himself, his various divine forms. As such, they are all the moving temples of the Lord. Therefore, Lord alone exists. Ultimately, when you come to experience that the self in me is the self everywhere, then alone there is total liberation from the bondage of the mortal. There is nothing superior to this experience of the oneness in everything. This is the highest experience. Na pro asti kaschit. When once this experience is gained, we get completely rooted in the spiritual experience of the Supreme. The perception of plurality ceases, meaning no more do we see the objects as distinctly separate, but in that new light of wisdom, all of them coalesce to be the one, shining in their new garment of beauty, peace, truth. The names and forms are there, but in and through them all, we come to see the truth, the reality everywhere. In our spiritual sadhana, a stage comes when nothing of the outer world is experienced, neither the objects, emotions, thoughts, nor the body, mind, intellect. Within and without, there is nothing but the binding flesh of reality, that state in which there is nothing but consciousness and perceptions of the body, mind, and intellect have totally ended, is the experience of the whole universe as the self. Sarva Atma Bhava. The spiritual apprehension is in fact entirely different from all the intellectual and logical conclusions arrived at by our sages. That pure spiritual experience is indicated here as Sarvatma Bhava, the vision of the universe as the self. Stanza number 341. दृश्याग्रहणं कथं नु घट्टते देहे आत्मना तिष्ठतो बाह्या अर्था अनुभव परशक्ति मनसस्त्रिक्रियाः कुर्वतः सन्न्यस्ता अखिलं धरम करम विषय नित्य आत्म निष्ठा प्रहि सत्वजी करणी आत्मानि सदा अनुच्छय भी यत्नः. How is the exclusion of the objective world possible for him who lives identified with the body, whose mind is attached to the perception of external objects, and who performs various acts for that end? This exclusion should be carefully practiced by sages who have renounced all kinds of duties and actions and objects, who are passionately devoted to the eternal Atma and who wish to possess undying absolute bliss. In order to attain total liberation, perception of the world of plurality has to cease. How can this be brought about? How the non-perception of the world of objects is possible under certain conditions, and how the same under different set of unfavorable conditions is rendered impossible are discussed in this verse. First, Sankara discusses how and why it is not possible for the man to gain this state of perfect vision of oneness, the state of not perceiving the delusory world of object, emotions, thoughts. Drishya agrahanam is not possible for an individual who has the idea I am the body. Looking through the body, objects must be perceived. Where can they go? To a dreamer, the dream is inescapable all along his dream state. To the ego, the world of objects is inescapable as long as he has the idea body am I. The body, mind, and intellect equipments cannot realize the one. To a person of body sense, Dehi Atam Bhava, how can there be the experience of the oneself in all? Parma Atma Bhava, how can he gain the concept of the oneness of the infinity reality, the non-apprehension, agrahanam of all misapprehensions cannot be to an individual who is identified with and looking through the equipments. The state of objectless awareness cannot be experienced by an individual who is turned outward. Not only is he identified with his physical body, but his mind is constantly contemplating upon the sensuous objects of the world outside. It is always engaged in the unholy experience of the plurality of worldly objects. Therefore, his actions get ordered by his own sensuous thoughts. An individual who is thus constantly associated with his body and so fully engaged and preoccupied with his sensuous thoughts that his hands and legs constantly sweat to fulfill his endless desires and accomplish his impossible thoughts. How can he ever have the non-apprehension, agrahana of the world of objects? He is at all times turned towards them. He is deliberately nourishing delusory fancies. He insists on recognizing the world of plurality which he hugs on to as his life's greatest fulfillment. In utter love, where the sadhak merges into the infinite Lord, there and all his responsibilities to duties, to activities, and to objects, and there he comes to that experience supreme. The attachments to one's duties, dharma, to worldly activities, karma, and to the sensuous objects, vistaya, have all to be renounced, and in their place we must cultivate the attachment to and contemplation upon the self. When we are striving in meditation to propel ourselves and land into the higher consciousness, then all the ego prompted secular and sacred activities of the lower plants must stop. Whatever activities I might have done in my dream, however sacred and auspicious they might have been, the moment I wake up, the dream work grinds to a stop. Not because I do not want to continue it, but the dreamer who was doing the work is no more available in his waking state. The entire field of activity and equipments of action available in the dream have now merged into me, the waker. They are no more available in my waking condition. Similarly, the secular and the sacred activities that we undertake and the various objects that we quote are all transcended by those who are constantly living in the contemplation of the Atma, the Brahma. As a result of it, they become knowers of Brahma, nay, they become Brahma. In the Brahmic consciousness, the world of plurality is not available. Stanza number 342. Srav atam siddhaye bhikshu कृत सर्वणं कर्मणं समाधिं विदधात् तेषा शांतो दान्त इति श्रुति. To the sannyasin who has listened to the discourses upon the scriptures and who has cultivated calmness, self-control, etc., to him the Shruti prescribes samadhi for realizing that the whole universe is the self sarva atma siddhi. A very famous statement of Brihadaranyaka Upanishad is referred to in this verse. In one line, it indicates what a seeker must do in order to make himself fit for the final spiritual experience. Six qualities are mentioned, and they are all to be diligently cultivated. Keep this sixfold wealth in your pocket and start upon the pilgrimage to perfection. If you have these six adjustments in yourself, then you shall reach to see the reality in your own self, Atmani. These personality disciplines are number one, calmness, sama, number two, self control, dama, three, mind withdrawn from all objects, emotions, thoughts, uparti, four, capacity to suffer silently and nobly the little pin pricks of life, titiksha, fifth, faith in yourself, in the Shastra, and in reality, Shraddha, and six, contentment with what you have been blessed with, Samadhan. Equipped with these, the seeker will find the spiritual realization is very simple. He can now readily turn his entire attention upon his own self and realize it directly. Atmani eva atmana pashyet. The two supplementary qualities necessary in an individual who wants to experience the oneself present everywhere are that he must be a renouncer, bhikshu, and has listened to the discourses upon the scriptures. Krita sarvanaha karmanaha. A sannyasi bhikshu is one who has renounced everything and lives on the bare minimum of objects that he may accidentally come across by sheer chance and is not running hungrily after them. Such an individual, if he has done sufficient listening to the teacher and has performed enough selfless, dedicated experience of samadhi, such an individual must practice samadhi. It is thus prescribed by the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad in one of its well-known statements. Stanza number 343. आरूढ़ शक्तिन रहमो विनाशः कर्तुन्ने शक्य सहसा अपि पंडितः ये निर्विकल्पा समाधि निश्चला स्थान्तरात्म भवा हि वासना. Even wise men find it impossible to suddenly destroy the ego once it has become strong, except for those who have become perfectly calm through nirvikalpa samadhi. Indeed, desires are the effects of innumerable births. The attitude of the individuality, the perceiver, feeler, thinker, I am sense arises as a result of one's ignorance of the self. It has been maintained by each one of us for a long period of time during our slow scrambling up the ladder of evolution from the beginning of time. Hence, this ego cannot be annihilated immediately, nor is it at any time easy, except those who have become steadfast in the experience of Nirvikalpa Samadhi. Even great learned and wise men cannot end their ego suddenly. Nirvikalpa Samadhi is the state of mindlessness where all thoughts have been consciously eliminated and blissfully transcended. At this stage, merger with the reality becomes complete when the ego goes deeper and deeper into the contemplation upon the purpose of existence. It totally disappears to become the consciousness. That state of hushed bliss is called Nirvikalpa Samadhi. Stanza number 344. Aham buddhayev mohinna योजित्वा व्यर्थबलात् विक्षेप शक्ति पुरुषम विक्षेप यति तद्गुणहि. The projecting power through the aid of the willing power confuses the man with storms of egoistic ideas and distracts him through the attributes of that agitation. The power of willing renders the intellect incapable of apprehending reality. Therefore, the mind gets agitated. Whenever the intellect gets clouded, the mind projects and imagines. This is the natural trick of the mind and intellect. At all times, the individual comes to suffer the endless sorrows because of the agitations created in the mind. Thus, everyone in this world is unhappy in his own way. The quality and quantity of unhappiness in each individual is in accordance with the type of his manifesting vasana. Stanza number 345. Vikshep Shakti Vijiyo Vishmo Vidhatum Nishes Avaran Shakti Nivirt Bhave दिग्दृश्यो सपुटपयो जल विदिद्भागे नश्येत दाव आवरण आत्मनि च स्वभावात् निसंशयेन भवति प्रतिबन्धशून्यो विक्षेपणां नहि तदा यदि चेन्मृतार्थे. It is extremely difficult to conquer the projecting power unless the wailing power is perfectly rooted out, and that covering over the Atmana naturally vanishes when the subject is perfectly distinguished from the objects like milk from water. But the victory is undoubtedly complete and it becomes free from all obstacles when there is no oscillation of the mind due to the false sense objects. Ordinarily, a man cannot control his mind. He may conquer the whole world, but conquering his own mind is no easy job. As long as the wailing power, avarna Shakti, is not completely removed, so long the projecting power, Vikshepa Shakti, will naturally make the individual dance. As long as there is non-apprehension of the reality, the misapprehensions will continue. Until the reality is experienced, the vasanas will remain, and under their compelling urges, the body, mind, intellect, equipment will gush out to gather their experiences among the world of objects, emotions, thoughts. Nobody can stop this until the higher awakening is experienced. The attractions and enchantments of the lower planes of consciousness will be natural. There is no escape. Only on the apprehension of the Supreme can all this stage gushing out truly come to an end. So, to gain a total mastery over the agitations of the mind is not all that easy. It takes time. As long as the cause of the disease exists, the symptoms of the disease cannot end. Similarly, as long as the higher is not apprehended, the flesh will crave for flesh, the mind will crave for emotional satisfaction, the intellect will gurgle out in an thousand desires. Hence, a novice finds it impossible to give up his enchantments for sense objects. This non-apprehension of reality can be ended only by those who have the capacity to analyze, understand, and discriminate between the subject and the object, and who have the heroism to reject the lower and leave the higher. This is as subtle and as difficult as separating water and milk from a mixture of the two. The capacity to dis- distill away the milk from mixture of milk and water is the special function attributed to the mythological bird, the Hansa. When the intellect starts vividly discriminating between the subject drik and the object drishya, and when it has got the capacity of removing the subject away from the world of objects, the subject by itself rediscovers the supreme essence of its own nature, divine. Then the non apprehension of reality, avarna, automatically ends when an intellect persists in its habit of continuously analyzing and constantly understanding the self and the not self. When it becomes brilliant in its function of discrimination between the subject and the object, the misapprehensions of the subject caused by the non apprehension and by themselves without any extra effort. Ayatnataha. When you start realizing that you are the subject, the one who is aware, and that these objects are all in you, and when they are removed, you are the objectless awareness and are no more really involved in them, you become, as it were, distilled away from them and their deluding confusions. As a result of this, the pure self is revealed without any special effort. In that experience of the self, there can be no trace of any doubt at all. I may doubt everything, but about myself there will be no doubt at all. This self, being the subject, is the very core in each one of us. Realizing that the self in me is the self everywhere, there is nothing which is other than me. Hence, there are no mental agitations. So, then who will doubt and how? In Sanskrit, Hansa denoting this bird has a pertinent etymological meaning. I am Ahem. He, Saha is Hansa. To realize I am He is the bird Hansa. Having woken up from a dream, will the waker any more yearn for the embrace of the dreamer's wife? The dreamer's wife was loved by the dream body, which on waking is no more available to the waker. Similarly, when the individual wakes up to the higher plane of consciousness, he will have no more oscillations of the mind. Pratibandha Sakunneha. Even if it tempting objects of pleasure are around him, he knows that they are all false. Mrisha. Stanza number 346. सम्य अविवेक विवेक है सफुट बोध जन्यो विभज्य दृग दृश्य पदार्थ तत्वम छिन्नति मायाकृत मोहबंधम यस्मात् दिवि मुक्तस्य पुनर्न संसरति. Perfect discrimination arising from direct realization distinguishes the true nature of the subject from that of the object, and snaps the bond of delusion created by Maya. There is no more transmigration for one who has liberated himself from this. How to discriminate between and understand the subject and the object is a theme ex- exhaustively dealt with in Bhagavad Gita. Due to right knowledge arising out of clear discrimination, the understanding of the subject as distinctly different from the object becomes deep and all doubts get completely cleared up. The seer and the seen, drishyat. This is a typical phraseology used in Vedanta. It is a comprehensive phrase. It indicates not only the seer and seen, but it includes the hearer and the heard, the smeller and the smelt, the taster and the tasted, the toucher and the touched, and thus the knower and known. In or short, the idiom denotes all known subject object relationships. Those who have thus, as a result of clear discrimination, pure knowledge of the subject and object, comprehended the reality which by itself plays as both the subject and object everywhere. It is the substratum, the essential sport of both the subject and the object. The subject and the object are different expressions of the same reality. Just as the waker's mind is the only essence tattva in the dreamer and all that he had dreamed. When this apprehension of reality comes, it banishes all the effects created by the non apprehension of reality. It destroys all vasanas. It cuts down the avidya along with all its effects. The effects of non apprehension of reality, avidya, are delusions or misapprehensions, and because of them there is bondage, the strong sense of identification with one's body, mind, intellect, equipment. Hence, an individual is liberated totally when all his sense of limitation created by delusory misconceptions arising from the non apprehension of reality has been ended because of his vivid and direct apprehension of reality. To such an individual, there cannot be again any sansar as Maya. The cause for it has ended in him. Stanza number 347. प्रावरीकत्वा विवेक वही देहत्ते विद्यागहनम हविशेषम किम सयातु पुनः संसृण अस्य बीज बीजम द्वैत भावम समुपेशु उच्च. The knowledge that the jiva is the Brahma entirely consumes the impenetrable forest of avidya or nescience. For him who has realized the state of oneness, is there any seed left for future transmigration out of one's discrimination between the transcendental and the terrestrial, between the higher and the lower? Right knowledge arises. One should contemplate upon God, Isvara, ego, Jiva, and the world Jagat. What constitutes this universe? What is this I? What is the reality behind both these? What is that which plays as the world and as me? One alone plays as the higher para and the lower apra. This fire of knowledge, kindled by discriminative contemplation upon reality, can burn down the entire avidya, ignorance, leaving not even a flimsy streak of it to cloud the vision divine. Will such an individual ever tumble again into the enchantments of the world within and without. One who has that Advaita Bhava, he who is the experiencer of the one reality, has no transmigration at all, no more sansar. To him who has fully realized the Advaita Bhava, there is no cause for repeatedly falling into the state of misconceptions. Should you once realize that you are the Supreme Self, then you will not fall anymore into the misconception that you are the body, mind, and intellect, even though all the time you may continue to function through your body, mind, and intellect. The king, dressed as a beggar, sitting down and begging in the bazaar, does not so only as a recreation for himself, a sport. He will never misunderstand that he has been born as a beggar. He knows that he is the royal lord of the entire kingdom. Under the beggar's garments are the old gold embroidered silken robes from his royal wardrobe. He knows fully well that he is the king. So too a man of perfection, having gained the experience of the infinitude in himself, may move about in his physical body and experience the vicissitudes and sorrows of life as a sport. Yet the tragedies of the body can no longer affect him in his newly gained higher perception. He never gets involved in them. Stanza number 348. आवरणस्य निवर्ति भवति हि सम्यक् पदार्थ दर्शनतः मिथ्या ज्ञान विनास्ति द्वि आक्षेप्ति जनितो दुख निवर्ति. The veil that hides truth gets lifted indeed when reality is fully experienced. Soon follows the destruction of false understanding and the cessation of misery brought about by agitations created by the false knowledge. All misconceptions about an object, and only when it is clearly seen. A post may be misunderstood as a ghost, a rope as a snake, or Ramu may be mistaken for Krishna. You may misunderstand thus only when the post is seen in partial darkness, or the rope is seen in dim light, or Ramu is seen from a distance. When our knowledge of thing is not complete, the consequent non-apprehension of reality breeds delusory misconceptions about it. This is a fundamental universal law. The non-apprehension ends only when I actually apprehend the reality. When I see the post, the ghost is gone. When I recognize the rope, the serpent is gone. And when I see and recognize that he is Ramu, the misconception that he is Krishna has ended. When the misapprehension avarna has ended, all sorrows created by the agitations vikshepa will also end. The non-apprehension of the post veils the post in its place. When I see misapprehensions, the post as a ghost, the misapprehension gives me fear and sorrow. The post has not directly caused me any sorrow. The post was not recognized as a post. When the post is veiled by the non-apprehensions, I thought it was a ghost. This misconceived knowledge, mithya jnana, breeds for us our sorrows. The sorrows can end when the ghost is no more. Therefore, false knowledge should be ended in order to annihilate the sorrow experience. At this moment, the Atma, the Self, is not realized. It is veiled by our ignorance of the Self. The ignorance of the self is creating the misconception I am the body, mind, and intellect. The concept that I am a limited creature gives me the sorrows of life. When I apprehend the consciousness, the spiritual non apprehension in me naturally ends. Therefore, there is no more the demeaning feeling I am a jiva. Thus, the sorrows arising out of the ego sense, jivatma bhavana, are all ended. This is more clearly brought out in the following verse: cause effect false. Stanza number 349 to 353. Stanza number 349. एतत्रितयं दृष्टं सम्यग्रजो स्वरूपविज्ञानात् तस्मात् तवस्तु सत्वं ज्ञात्वं बन्धमुक्तये विदुषा. These three are observed in the rope when its true nature is fully apprehended. Hence, the wise man should know the true nature of things in order to break his bonds. When the knowledge of rope is veiled from one's cognition, three conditions are experienced. One, the veiling or ignorance of the rope. Two, projecting a snake in its place. And three, the fear arising from the snake. These three are always there whenever one sees a snake in a rope. Had the rope been seen as a rope, there would have been no sorrows. But when it is mistaken for a snake, the snake produces the sorrow. Therefore, it is absolutely essential for a man of true spiritual hunger to experience this great reality and to know the nature of the self in order to end the non-apprehension of the self and the consequent misconceptions, the identification with the BMI and resulting unavoidable sorrows. Stanza number 350. Ayo Agni Yoga Dev Sat Samanvaya त्रयादिरूपेण विजर्भते धी तत्कार्ये अतिदिवितं यतो मृषा दृष्टं भ्रम स्वपन मनोरथेषु. स्टेंजा नंबर 351. ततो विकाराः प्रकृते हम मुखाः देहवासना विशाश्च सर्वे अक्षणे अन्यथा भावितया हर्मीसा मस त्वम आत्मा तु कदापि नानित्था. Just as a piece of iron through contact with fire manifests as fire, the intellect manifests itself as the knower and the known through the immanence of Brahma. These two, the effects of the intellect, are observed to be unreal as in delusion, dream and imagination. So too the modifications of Prakriti from the ego down to the gross body and all the sense objects are also unreal. Their unreality is indeed due to their being subject to change every moment, and the Atman never changes. When an iron piece is in contact with fire, it absorbs the heat and the luminosity of the fire, and after a sufficiently long time it will be difficult to tell which is the glowing iron piece and which the burning piece of charcoal. They both become of the same nature. Similarly, when the not self, the matter is in contact with the self, the consciousness, it acquires the semblance of consciousness. If the iron piece is removed from the fire and for a time kept away from it, the fire of the iron drains away to the elemental fire and the iron reverts to its own nature. Iron by nature is heavy black in color and cold to touch. A glowing piece of charcoal is light in weight, golden in color and hot to touch. Both have distinctly opposite characteristics. A piece of iron can never be mistaken for a burning piece of charcoal. Yet, if the iron is kept in the fire for a sufficiently long time, the qualities of the fire are transferred to the iron piece, and the iron's own qualities are temporarily not available to at all. The body, mind, and intellect are inert and insentient by themselves, but when they are in contact with the self, it lends its glory to them and they seem to be divine by themselves. The BMI are brilliant only as long as they are alive. Once removed from life, they lose their capacities for perceiving, feeling, and thinking. The knowing principle behind the intellect, when it suffuses the thoughts, it becomes the knower. Conscious thoughts of the intellect constitute the knower, but there cannot be any knower unless there is something to be known. Thus, the Atman functioning through the intellect not only becomes the knower but also the world to be known. The subject and the objects of the world are both the play of the consciousness through the intellect. When the intellect is hushed up with chloroform or when it has folded up in deep sleep, the subject object game ends. When thrilled by the self, it is this intellect itself which manifests as the subject and the object. Both are the effects of the light of consciousness functioning through the intellect equipment. In fact, the subject object relationship is false and unreal. Dream, delusion, and imagination are examples. It is I myself who becomes the experiencer and the objects experienced in my day to day life. The subject, the object, and their play are all in me, myself, in my mental wool gathering. The subject and the objects are my own projections. Similarly, all that I see at this moment are the delusory creations of my own intellect, which has its capacity to project them from the self. The Atman has not done anything by itself, it never does. The intellect, which is made up of matter, comes to shine in the light of consciousness. The spirit suffuses it, and thereafter the mind intellect equipment becomes thrilled with this capacity to project. Thus, the entire world with its subject object relationship gets projected. The intellect, gathering the semblance of consciousness from the self, becomes the subject, the objects, and their relationship. The subjective world consisting of the ego, PFT, the vasanas, the equipments of experience, the gross, the subtle, and the causal bodies, and the world of objects consisting of the objects perceived, the emotions felt, and the thoughts entertained are all projected by the mind fired by consciousness. The very nature of the entire creation is such that it never remains the same. Moment to moment it transforms into something else. Anyatha bhava, never permanent, it is ever changing and therefore unreal. The changeless is real, the Atma is something other than the intellect, and it never becomes anything other than itself. It knows no change. It is of its own nature at all times, it is immutable. This verse gives a beautiful example to show how from the infinite the finite has emerged, but nothing finite has ever come out of the infinite self. Then how is it that we are experiencing them? Such questions would normally arise. The answer is Sankara asserts like an iron piece appearing to be a fire piece when in contact with fire, ayo agni yogad eva. The superimposition can only reflect the qualities of the substratum. On a rope, we cannot have the delusory misconception of a cow, and superimposition is always mutual. It cannot be one way only. Sankara inquires into this phenomena of superimposition and says it is mutual superimposition, anyonya dhyasa. This is the technical term used by Sankara. Not only does the rope gain the properties of the snake, but the snake also borrows some properties from the rope. The snake is spotted, slimy, long, and has a hood. These snake properties are not in the rope, but they cover the rope, and the rope lends its existence to the fancied snake. The rope exists, the snake exists not. The non-existent snake exists for the deluded man. The imaginary snake has borrowed its existence from the rope. To the rope, the snake has lent its spotted, slimy appearance. Together, we see the rope as non-existence and the snake as existent. The snake properties we see and the rope properties we do not see. So, in delusion, our conclusion is the snake is, the rope is not. Today, we see the BMI, the ego, and its sorrows, and say these exist, but the reality of God, the consciousness, exists for us. When I apprehend the pure consciousness in myself, all the dharmas of the BMI retire. The BMI, PFT, and OET disappear. Alone, reality exists. This above described process is called mutual superimposition. Chenmonaya Adhyasa. Hence, we attribute a reality to the world perceived. What we see in the world around is the glaring expression of the infinite truth, which is the substratum everywhere. Names and forms are merely projections of our minds. Stanza number 352. नित्य द्वाखंड चिदेक रूपो बुद्ध आदि साक्षी सद सद दिविलक्षण है अहम पद प्रत्यय लक्षितार्थ प्रत्यक सदानंद घन प्रात्मा eternal, non-dual, unbroken knowledge of one form, the witness of the intellect, etc., neither gross nor subtle, indicated by the term I. The embodiment of subjective eternal bliss is the nature of the Supreme Self. This verse gives us an exhaustive definition of the Atma as far as words can express it. Eternal, Nitya, without beginning and end, non-dual, Advaya, there is nothing other than it in it. Unbroken, Akhanda, unconditioned by time, place, or objects, meaning that which is all pervading consciousness, Chit, of one form, Ekarupaha, the consciousness that knows no modifications. The reality is the witness of the functionings of body, mind, and intellect. Buddhyadi Sakshi, it is neither gross nor subtle. Sad Asad Vilaksanaha, meaning it is something other than both, something unique. That a thing is gross or subtle, that it exists or does not exist, these are the judgments of the intellect. With certain standards of understanding, we classify things as existing or non-existing, as good or bad, as subtle or gross, etc. All these are intellectual estimates which one is conscious of. However, the consciousness that illumines the gross and the subtle is in itself something other than them. Hence, in terms of intellectual and emotional classification, all that can be said about the self is it is beyond all such classification. The Atma is indicated by the subject I, Aham Pada. In the famous Vedantic maxims, it is the I in I am Brahma. Aham Brahma Asmi. This I is not the PFT, nor has it anything to do with BMI and the OET. The I, the consciousness, illumines all my thoughts, emotions, and actions. That consciousness is the true I which is present everywhere. The indicative meaning of I in the Mahavakya is the self. To experience this supreme self, Pratma, we will have to go into the very subject, Pratyak of our beings. At all times, the self is a totality of bliss. Sada Anand Ghana. This is so because there is no sorrow in it, which can be weighed against any measure of happiness. The cause for these sorrows are the BMI, PFT, and OET. When these are transcended all agitations, and where there is agitation, there is sorrow. Therefore, in terms of our present experience of the mind and intellect, the Atma is described as Ananda Ghana. Stanza number 353. इत्थं विपश्च स द्विभज निश्चितः तत्त्वं निजबोधदृष्टया ज्ञात्वा सौ आत्मना अखण्डबोधं तेभ्यो विमुक्तः स्वमेव शाम्यति. Thus the wise man, discriminating between the real and the unreal, establishing the truth by the insight of his knowledge and realizing his own self to be unbroken knowledge, becomes free and himself attains peace. Sankara first explained that which constitutes things unreal. Then he explained that which constitutes the real. A wise man should discriminate between the real and the unreal in the manner already explained. By rational thinking and close observation, he determines the truth by a process of discrimination. Through the vision of the higher, he ultimately comes to experience the consciousness in all its purity. When one realizes one's own self to be pure knowledge, one gets liberated from the ignorance of spirituality. The veiling avarna gets lifted and identification with the non-spiritual and its consequent agitations, vikshepa, and when these obstacles, veiling and projection are removed, the individual comes to experience quietude, divine. All obstacles are completely eliminated when an individual apprehends his spiritual nature. One, through intelligent discrimination between the self and the non-self. Two, through detachment from the not-self. And three, by complete identification with the self. So I conclude this video at this stage. Next video number 24 will start with the topic Samadhi, its nature. Stanza number 354 to 372. Thank you for watching this video. Namaskar, my dear friend. Thank you.